Welcome to Teachers Enhancements, and today we're going to be doing something new. It's just going to be me, you, my hairy arms, and these parts right here in front of us. If you don't know what you're looking at, it looks kind of normal, but it's a little bit different. And that is because this is actually a left-hand eject setup for the Faxon 6-inch barrel. Now, this was an upper that was sent to us by one of our customers. I'm not going to disclose the name of the individual, but he let us take a recording of what exactly happens on this upper as we evaluate what needs to be done. The main reason for him sending this to us is for a few different reasons, but the main one is the feed ramp overhang on the barrel extension, and also making sure that the headspace is good on this particular barrel and bulk carrier group. So there's a few different things that have to be done in order for us to prep for this. But the biggest thing is we have to kind of assess first whether we have to polish the feed ramps, which is not that preferred because this is a nickel Teflon barrel extension. So if I have to polish and remove the nickel Teflon, then that's gone for good. It causes other issues. So we're going to try to avoid to do that. Nonetheless, we have to make sure that the other alternatives are possible. So let's get to it. If you look in here, you can definitely see it's very minor, but there is some slight overhang of the feed ramps. Very minor on the left side more than anything. But it is something that can potentially cause damage to the bullet tip. So this needs to be corrected. Now, thankfully, it's not very much, which means we may be able to simply just do a few shims and space out the barrel. Now, this is something that the customer couldn't do because this barrel is a very tight fit onto this receiver. So he didn't have the right tools to extract it, so that's something we're going to be doing. And but before we get into that, let's address the situation, see if we can actually space it. And this is one of the bulk carriers that I recommended to him, specifically for left-hand use, and this is because of several reasons, which I will get into, but it is a DLC coated bulk carrier from Superlative Arms, and this is a DI one. Now, there's a few benefits for 300 blackout for this guy. One, it's the DLC, which is a very low friction coating. Not to mention that this carrier is ever so slightly lighter, not just because of the lightning cuts back here, but it actually has a bigger bore on here, which essentially renders the law folder useless, which is one of the things that you have to know when purchasing one of these carriers. This is one of the lightweight extensions we sell on the site, and it's just not happening. So if you plan on purchasing this and using it with a law folder, just know it's not going to work. So keep that in mind. He wasn't using a law folder, or he didn't have an intent on running a law folder, so that was not a big deal for him. So now let's get into our checks real quick. So one of the biggest things we want to look at is just kind of, it could be done by feel. There's definitely more dedicated tools for doing this, but simply by feel, you can tell that the actual bulk carrier is ever so slightly further out than the receiver. And that's good, because that means we have a little bit to work with. Now, it's not the end-all be-all, because you also have to see how it interacts with the lower itself. So, this is my personal lower. This is a receiver that I actually know is in spec. I've got many rounds through it. But I'm going to show you how to check to see if you have room to play with. And this is also a great way to check to see if your buffer will actually impact the buffer detent. So, the main thing you have to do is, with the buffer and the spring installed with the buffer detent, you want to throw your upper in the lower, like so, not with the pins. And you want to press it back slightly. And that is because we're tilting the bolt carrier, or the buffer, into alignment with the bolt carrier itself. And that's because with the detent, it's actually coming in at a little bit of an angle. So like the detent being below it is kind of tilting it. So in order for us to tell if it's good, we need to tilt it back into position. So it'll almost feel like a two-stage trigger. Essentially, you have a little bit of take up, and then you can feel full resistance right there, and then to the rear. So what we want is we want that separation. So if you do this little tilting motion and it's already touching and there's no gap right here, then that's a problem. That means you did not have enough room to push the barrel out further and space it. So the next step once you do this is verify that the pins themselves will not allow the actual upper receiver to slide forward. So once you do the take up, you're going to try and push the front pin in. And you saw that I can't push the front pin in. So first take up. See how it pushes the receiver to the rear? So that means that this receiver will, in lower combination, will 100% put the buffer away from the detent and not impact. Thankfully, because we have all that gap, that means we can shim it by a few thousandths and not even have an issue in general. And we will do this test once I'm done with the shimming, just to make sure that it's good. Now, the owner of this upper will also have to do the same test, just to make sure that it is good. But knowing with this lower being in spec, chances are there's not really going to be much of an issue. Now, once it's there, the rear pin is usually more oblong than round. So the rear pin doesn't do much as far as other than keeping it from tilting, but you can still do the check just with the rear pin. And you can see the rear pin also pulls it back. And that tells us everything we need to know. But you can see, I don't even know if you can see light underneath it, but that first stage and then rear. All right, perfect. So now we know we actually do have room to shim this barrel out. Now that I've got the barrel removed, we're gonna do a few simple checks on if this particular bolt and barrel will work together. Now, this is very important, especially for the 6-inch barrel, because it is notoriously under gas from the get-go. Now, the main purpose behind making sure your headspace is good is because its operation requires the use of reduced power springs and reduced mass, as well as if you end up with a tight headspace, you will actually end up causing more drag in the system, which is a loss of energy from the actual cycling of the system, because the cam pin has to work harder to unlock than it would be under normal conditions. And again, this could also be going forward. So if you were experiencing issues where you let the bolt go home and it struggles chambering around, or it does chamber, but now you have an issue extracting the live round, that would be a great indicator of a tight headspace. Now, so far, I have not really seen any situations with these Faxon barrels where you would have long headspace, so aka failing a no-go, for example. But we have had instances where the combination of bolts between barrel and bolts, coatings, and whatnot can affect and give you a tight headspace. It is something that can be resolved, but nonetheless, let's get started with this at hand. So first things first is we're going to check the barrel itself for tight headspace, and we do this with a PTG go gauge, and this is specifically a go gauge with essentially a bolt built into it. So it's very simple. It's for 300 blackout. Slide it in here, and then we're going to rotate it. And right off the bat, we can see that it actually rotates just fine. Now, if you notice, I went to the left. Now, why did I go to the left? Well, that's because the barrel extension itself has ramps cut into it that allow it to transition turning the bolt counterclockwise if you were looking at it in this direction. So why is that the case? It's actually because that's the direction that the bolt will rotate to lock, and then it rotates clockwise to unlock. So that is a huge and important thing to know when it comes to the actual setup that we're about to do. And that is because the left-hand eject upper receiver requires the bolt carrier to actually unlock in the opposite direction. So if I were to show you what I'm talking about, and you look at a left-hand eject model, you can see that the cam pin, obviously with it fully extended forward, is in the same place, but it actually locks clockwise and unlocks counterclockwise. That is huge, and it had to be done because in order for you to have the ejection on the left side, it means that the cut on the upper receiver for the cam pin to sit in has to be in the opposite direction, because otherwise you wouldn't have much of a shelf right there. It would just cause other problems, and then basically all in general, it has to rotate in the opposite direction. I'm sure there could be other ways of doing it, but this is by far the easiest way, so it's just the nature of what it is. Now, what does that mean? Well, realistically, there's not much of an issue with it rotating in the opposite direction. The main concern is the actual direction of the chamfers. Now, this barrel only has the chamfers for a bolt that would eject on the right side. So the lugs would only assist if turning bolt counterclockwise for locking and clockwise for unlocking. If we're going to change the rotation, it means that we are now rotating towards a hard edge. There is no smooth transition, there is no chamfer. It is just a 90-degree hard edge, and that can pose a problem. Now, I know that the bolt or the barrel itself is good with headspace. Now let's try the bolt itself, but we're going to use the same barrel because we know the barrel is good. Now, the next step that I would have to do, just to make sure I don't get too carried away, is just to check it with a no-go gauge. I do have a no-go gauge. This one's slightly modified. It had some material taking off so that I can do it with the extractor and ejector still in. It does require a little bit more of a patient hand to ensure that it is not going to be, that it is properly aligned. But this is just because this gauge was not meant to do that. So if I go to rotate it clockwise, which is where it's supposed to rotate for this bolt, it will not go in, which is good. If I go the other way, it will not. Let's play around with it a little bit. And this is not the most ideal, but as long as it does not close on this, then we are essentially good to go as far as making any further modifications if need be. Now, let's do a quick little check for the actual go gauge. So for that, I am gonna have to remove the ejector and the extractor. So the actual bolt itself is now has the ejector removed. So we're gonna check headspace, make sure it's go. It's good at go. And for this, I have my go gauge right here, which we'll set all of this kind of to the side. And first things first, obviously take the barrel, throw the go gauge down in there, and let's see if we can get it to lock. And it does. It's actually a really good fit, and that's excellent. It's a little on the tight side, which isn't like necessarily a bad thing, but it is locking. It should only do it with finger pressure. This will actually correct itself with a break-in, just a few little cycles. So as long as it isn't like literally forcing it or camming it, that's definitely a no. Don't do that. This has to be just with your two fingers. You should be able to lock it into place, which it does. Now, once again, this guy rotates clockwise for locking. So let me show you what a bolt that is standard would look like. So this is a right hand eject model, so I'm gonna put it on my right side. And then this is a left hand. You can see that there's LH markings right there. So if we were to stand them up so that the cam pin was vertical, the way that it would have to go, they would sit like this. This would be in the unlocked position. And for them to lock, they would actually do something like this. Just about 22 degrees of rotation to lock. But that is essentially it. They're rotating in the opposite direction. Now, if you look at the actual ramps on the bolts, because there is a little chamfer right there, really hard to see, but this one has the chamfer on this side as if it was rotating clockwise, whereas this one has the chamfer rotating counterclockwise. So that is the main culprit here. Now, if you had a upper receiver, 300 blackout for example, or anything of that nature, and you had tight headspace, This issue with the ramps would be insanely worse than it would be on a standard right-hand eject model. And that is because of the lack of those chamfers. Now, don't get me wrong, they do put the chamfers on the bolt, but by them not being on the barrel extension, it's not as ideal as it would be if it was with both ends of the lugs chamfered, both the barrel extension and the bolt. So, in essence, this combination is actually great. So, there is absolutely nothing wrong with the setup. The only thing that this setup needs is for us to space the barrel out a little bit so that we can get the feed ramp alignment to be correct. Verify that the bolt carrier doesn't sit too far, because by us pushing the barrel extension forward, we end up pushing the bolt carrier forward when it's in its resting position. So that is basically all we have to do. So this is going to be a very simple modification, and there is nothing crazy that needs to be done. That said, if you do want to venture into the left-hand eject models for 300 blackout, headspace is absolutely crucial with these. Otherwise, you will have worse problems than you would on a standard right-hand eject model. Now, from what we've dealt with, there are a few other things that you have to keep in consideration when it comes to the left-hand eject models, and that is absolutely friction reduction. So that is why we recommended that he went with a DLC carrier, because this is a low friction coating. It doesn't affect the tolerances too much compared to what it would be like nickel boron or something with the heavier plating, for example. And obviously it has lightning cuts, which will indeed help the left-hand eject model just because of the deficiencies of the actual lug cuts. So there's just simply a lot going on for this left-hand eject bolt. Couple that with an NP3 cam pin, you reduce friction even further, which is something that the customer requested. So we're going to be doing that. And basically that is about it. There really isn't much to do with this guy. He also doesn't have much of an issue with this billet upper that he chose. That's primarily because it is, once again, billet. The forged ones, I have had situations where they end up being crushed. So you would have the bolt carrier slide in, and then it would have a few hang-ups here and there just from this being crushed. So typically billet uppers are a lot better in that regards. From what I've dealt with, I'm sure that's not the only case, but it is something important to note. So keep that in mind. Friction is your enemy for all 300 blackouts, but left-hand eject models basically make it worse. So keep that in mind. Do your build properly. Make sure you get the specs right. Check headspace. Let us know if your headspace is tight. Definitely replace your bolt or barrel if your headspace is loose. We are offering these kinds of inspections, so definitely contact us if you're interested in this, especially if you're having a platform or a 6-inch 300 blackout barrel that's having issues. But for the time being, this is all that we're going to cover on this video, and we will be sending this upper back to our customer with the barrel extension depth corrected, and have him make the checks on his lower to ensure that there's not going to be any issues. Other than that, that is basically it. Just keep all of this in mind if you're doing a 300 blackout left-hand eject. I would also recommend, if you're going this far with the bolt, to upgrade the springs to a Sprinko ejector and a Sprinko 5-coil extractor, which I will be seeing if the customer wants to do, simply because they are superior springs, they last longer, they can take more abuse, and for 300 blackout, with how much bolt carrier velocities vary, it is very good for you to have very good springs on these, because these will absolutely make or break its ability to eject and extract. Also, it's worth mentioning that these have aux, and I can't say aux screws because the S stands for screws, so they've got aux. This is actually what we use on our carriers. If you are interested in our carriers, these are our bolt carriers. We have these made for us by River City Armory, hence the adjustable gas key, which we decided to go with because this is a very simple and fast solution for you to add adjustable gas without having to completely do a teardown on your system. Simple drop it in, adjust it, locks it in place. The type of locking is actually a set screw behind the adjustment set screw. And if you're curious if that system is valid, this is exactly what the Honey Badger uses on their gas block. You just have a set screw to adjust the position, and then you have a secondary locking one behind it. That includes all the parts. And we also have aux as standard on ours. So this is our bolt carrier. If you're interested, we do not have these in left-hand eject. We just have them in right-hand eject. So these are also standard on our Zverd upper, which we just released, which is a very inexpensive, high quality complete upper, which uses Roscoe barrel, Rubber City Armory C158 bolt carrier with aux, and it is extremely affordable for what it is if you'd like to check it out. On that is about all I have for you guys, and I will catch you guys next time. Make sure you check out our website, follow us on Reddit, basically follow us anywhere. It definitely helps the algorithms, and definitely support us by purchasing from our site if possible. It really helps us continue with our research into the 300 blackout platforms. Thank you.